If you're picking up from part 3, you can just follow along. If you are new to this series and did not watch parts 1, 2, and 3, you can simply go to my GitHub repo and clone the hamburger menu -starter. If you want to go back to parts 1, you're going to clone the hamburger menu starter. If you want the final copy, you can just copy the master branch. It's really all up to you on how you want to go about following along. Now the first things we need to do is we need to install React Router DOM. If you are following along and you have not installed it yet, you can just open up the terminal and then just run npm install React Router DOM. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to install it again. What I am going to do is run npm run start just so that we can get our project started. Let's close this terminal. And the very first thing I would like to do is restructure our project a bit. So the very first thing I would like to do is I would like to create a pages directory. In our source folder, we can create a new folder and just simply write pages. We can create a new file, and our first file will be called about.js. And what we could do in here is write RAFCE, and this will create an about component, and make sure you capitalize it. Now we are going to completely style our internal pages, but we'll just give them a bit of styling just so that we can display them on the screen. So the first class name or the parent class name of our component is going to be called page, and then inside page is going to be called container, and then inside our container is going to be a row, and then we're going to add an h3 and just say this is the about page. We'll go ahead and save this, and we'll want to recreate this for our other pages. We've got approach, case studies, home, and services. So let's go ahead and copy and paste this and rename about copy to approach. And all we're doing here is just changing the component name to approach. And we're also changing where it says about to approach. So this is the approach page. This is going to be a little bit redundant, so if you want to fast forward, go ahead and do that. But I'm going to create one for case studies. And make sure you camel case when you have 2 words. So in our case here, we're just going to do case studies. And then just simply switch to case studies. And then we're going to copy and paste this again and rename. Now this one's going to be called services. And like we did before, just change the component name to services, and then just say this is the services page. Now the very last page we are creating is in fact the home page. However, it's going to have a different layout. It's going to take the layout that we already have, which is on app.js. We're just going to put it in its own page. So let's create home.js, and we can write RAFCE for our shortcuts for creating a functional component, and we'll simply say home right here. So what I would like to do is in our app.js, I want to copy everything that we have here and put it into our home.js. So I'm going to split these two and let's get to work. So I'll first want to copy what we have in our return. So we've got header, banner, cases. We're actually going to leave header. We're just going to take the intro overlay and the banner and cases. So let's go ahead and copy all this and just leave header in there. And then inside of our home, we can get rid of this div and leave it as a fragment. And then we could paste those in here. Now what I could do is just add in the last letter so that we can have auto imports, or you can import them manually. But what I'm doing here is just letting VS Code auto import the components that we have automatically. So let's put cases, oops. There we are. So we are importing all these components into our home components, our home page. We can get rid of this div here so that we can have a fragment, and let's get rid of the class name app, and we can save it for now. We'll only be displaying the header, and so if we look at our project, all there is just header, but it's fine because we are restructuring our project right now. In our app.js, we can get rid of these imports for our components because we're no longer using them in app.js. And then I'll like to take this use effect. What this use effect is doing is creating the animation. So I'll like to take this entire use effect and just take it out of our app and then paste it into our home component. Now we will need to bring in use effect And we'll also need to bring in GSAP. So let's import GSAP as well in our home.js. We can then get rid of GSAP on our app.js. Now I still want to leave a use effect in our app.js, and the use effect that I'm leaving in here is for our flash. So whenever a page loads, we don't want it to flash, and we want to set the body to visible. And that is right here. So this that we ran earlier, let me control B so that we can hide that. This right here, GSAP.to body, sets the body to visible. So we don't want that in our home. We kind of just want that in our entire app. Okay, so we could save this here. Another thing I wanted to add in our app.js was this VH variable we had created earlier. So we can copy this and just leave it in our use effect here. So let's just add this in our app.js. Now, if we add home to our app.js underneath the header, so we're adding this home components, which is our home page, what should happen is, let's make sure we import it. So let's use auto import. Now, if we save this and preview, what should happen is it should just render the home component like we did before. So we just completely split it and put it in our app.js. Now, this works, but it's not what we're trying to do. What we want to do is we want to create a route for it so that when we're on the home page, it will render the home component. We'll get to that in a second, and we will define our routes in app.js. But first, what I want to do is focus on home.js and kind of just organize it a bit more before we jump into our routes. So let's close app.js for now, and we'll get to that in a sec. Now, what I would like to do in home.js is I want to split this animation. So I want to take this entire animation out and put it into its own variable. So we can create an animation variable calling it home animation. And inside this home animation function, we can just return the home animation. And we can just paste it up here. So const.tl GSAP timeline. Now we want to return this function for the animation in our use effect. However, in GSAP, there's a method called onComplete, which allows you to return a function when the animation is complete. So what I would like to happen is when this animation is completely done, I want to set this black overlay to unmount. I want it to completely be removed from the DOM. Now, adding a display none works, but it's just going to stay there, and we don't want it to stay there. We want it to completely unmount. So this is pretty cool, and I am gonna pick up the pace now, so just follow along. What we'll write in our use effect is the home animation function. So we'll just say home animation like so, and this will return the home animation in our use effect. Now, the last animation that happens is this case image. What happens here is that the images kind of zoom out. What we want to also add in here is an onComplete, and this is part of GSAP. So on complete, when the animation is completely done, we want to run a complete animation function. And we haven't created this animation yet, but we'll do that right now. What complete animation is going to do is it's going to simply change the state. We'll need to define state. So what I'm going to do here is write const animation complete, and then we're going to say set animation complete. And what this is going to do is just let us know if the animation is complete or not. So we'll just say use state, and we'll just set it to false for now. Use state is undefined because we haven't pulled it in. So now everything is good to go, except this animation or this complete animation function is not yet defined. What we'll do is we'll create a const complete animation. And what complete animation, this function is going to do is it's simply going to set animation complete, which is our state, to true. We can write true, or we can write the opposite of the animation complete, which is opposite of false is true. I'll just leave it as true for now because we don't want to toggle necessarily. You'll typically use the exclamation point and then the state when you want to toggle back and forth. In our case, we're just going to leave it at true because it's only going to be a one-time thing. All right, Now what we need to do is we can't necessarily access animation or the complete animation function. What we need to do is just pass it in as an argument here in home animation. And then in the home animation parameters, we'll simply write complete animation. And so what this is doing is complete animation is simply representative of set animation to true. Now in our return, what we want to do here is we want to check when animation complete is set to false, we want to return intro overlay. And when animation complete is true, we want to completely unmount it or just simply not return anything at all. So we can say animation complete is equal to false. We would like to return this intro overlay component. Otherwise, just, do nothing. All right, so let's save this and preview what we have. If we could open it up, intro overlay right here, we have top and bottom, and then once the animation is complete, it will just get removed from the DOM. To better represent it here in our completion animation, where we set the animation complete to true, we can simply write an alert, and we can say animation complete. Now you don't need to follow along for this part right here. I'm just showing you that once the animation has completed, we're going to prompt us a message saying animation complete. Great, so this is animation complete right there. All right, so we'll go ahead and remove this alert and we'll save home.js. Now I'll want to focus on the app.js. Specifically, we want to create our routes now. What I first need to do is I need to import our components. So let's create a comment and write components, and I will import case studies, and we're importing this from .pages, ./pages/case studies. Now I'm going to copy and paste this again, and we'll change this to approach, and then change the file name to approach as well, similar to the services. And then we could type in services here to bring in a services component, and then similar to about, and we have one more, which is the home. Or sorry, we already imported home up here, so that's fine. We'll bring in about. All right, we can copy and paste home as well so that we can have it specifically here. Now I know I said components here, but I'll rather just say pages. Okay, cool. So we've got all of our pages imported. What we'll want to do now is create an array for our routes. And what routes is going to represent, and what routes is going to have is an object containing the path and the name of the component as well as the component itself. I'll demonstrate for you right here. So what I'll do is I'll write path, and path is going to get a /, and this is specific to our home page. Next we have name, and we can just call it home. And then we have component. Now what component's going to represent is the component itself. So we'll write home. Now the amount of times we'll write this is dependent on how many pages you have. So our next page is case studies, and then the case studies is gonna look like this. Gonna have case studies as our name, and then the component is going to be the case studies component. We'll copy this again, and we'll do it for approach. So the path is going to be approach, the name is going to be approach, and the component is going to be the approach component that we had created. Let's copy this and paste it 2 more times, and we'll add services. We'll write services, and then the component is going to be services. Finally, we have about, and for the about URL or the path, I want to do about-us. Then the name is going to be about us. I'll do capital, and then the component is just about. Okay, so we've created our routes here, and what we'll want to do is we'll want to map through our routes and then return the component. So we'll want to check whatever URL we're on, and we'll want to match that exact path, displaying the component that we have. So right now I am returning home, but what I'll want to do is I'll add a div with the class name of app, and you can name it whatever you want. Some people usually have main. I'm just going to put app, and then we'll do routes dot map to have more room to work with. Yeah, I do. Okay. routes.map, which is going to map through our routes. And then we're going to use destructuring to get the path and the component as well. We are then going to return a route, and we're going to pass it a key of the path. And then we're going to make sure we pass in the exact attribute so that the paths match exactly to what we have written. And then our path is going to represent path, which was defined up here in our routes. And then we can close this route component. Now inside the route component, we want to return our component. All right, so we can close this. Now we are getting an error because we haven't defined route. We'll want to define routes at the very top simply by writing import route, and we're importing this from React router DOM. We'll go ahead and save this. Now we'll also want to go to index.js and import browser router. We need to completely wrap our entire app with the browser router. So what we could do is write import browser router, and we'll import it as router. And we'll import this from React router DOM. And again, this is in our index.js, which will wrap our entire app component. And so in here, we're just going to write router, and inside, not route, oops, I messed up. Route, like so, and inside route, we're going to return the app. So it would look like this. Now back in our app.js, what we could then do here is simply just preview and make sure that what we have is actually working. So let's look at our project, and we can see we're on localhost 3000, which is our home. Now if we go to /about-us, you can see it's not styled, but you'll see this is the about page. And then if we go to case-studies, you'll see this is the case studies page. What was another page? What do we have? Oh, I put 2 S's for services. That's not good. So fix services. If we go to services, you'll see this is the service page. Now, if we go back home, if we hit agency, it will just take us back home and load the home components intro animation. All right, cool. So we've got a lot done so far, but we still got a lot more that we need to complete. What we're going to focus our efforts on next is creating our navigation component and creating the styles as well. So in our components folder, we'll want to create a new file, and we'll call this file navigation.js. We'll write RAFCE to create a React functional component. I think the CE part is related to the export default. I know if you write RFAC, it would export the variable rather than exporting, or exporting the function rather than exporting as default. Okay, so make sure we capitalize navigation. And we'll also want to jump into our styles, components, and then create a new file for navigation. Oop, I messed with the navigation.scss. Okay, don't forget to import your navigation. So in our app.sass, we'll want to import navigation. Okay, let's save that, and we'll save navigation.js. Okay. So in the next scene, what you're going to see is a bunch of duplicated files. You'll see that every file has a number 2 at the end, and don't forget about this. I am going to resolve the issue after we finish building out the navigation component. I only realized it at the end, and honestly, it ruined my entire time of making this video, and I'm extremely disappointed at it. It isn't going to affect your project in any way, but just ignore it. I think my repo spazzed out and then it duplicated every single file. So as we finish the navigation component, we are going to fix that issue. Now here is where we'll spend some time creating the JSX for the navigation and styling it as well. So we'll want to create a nav tag. We could do it like this. And inside the nav tag, we've got a container. And inside the container, we've got a nav-columns. And inside the nav columns, we have a nav-column. And within the column, we have a nav-label. Now the nav label is going to take in a menu, and then still being inside the nav column, we're going to have a, not a callback, but a UL, which is not letting me, there you go, an unordered list. And actually the unordered list is going to have a class name of nav-links with an S. And inside the nav links, we're going to have an li tag. And inside the li tag, here is where we're going to have those main links that we have on the left side. And in here is where we're going to have our main links. So we're going to use React Router specifically to bring in nav link. And our first link is going to be case studies. Now you'll want to import nav links from React Router. Once we have that imported, what we could do is in the nav link, we'll add a to attribute, and we'll specify the path. So it's going to be case-studies. And what this nav link is going to do is it's going to mimic an A tag, but it's going to allow us to stay in our application. And if we were to do an A tag, it would refresh the page. So the purpose of nav links is so that we could stay within the routing of our React app and not refresh the page. Now we're going to copy this a few more times. So let's copy the list item again. And for the next one, we're just going to change it to say approach. And the path is going to be approach. Let's copy and paste that one more time and change the path to services and add services right here. Make sure it's capitalized. Okay, and so we actually need one more, and the last one is going to be about us. So go ahead and do about-us, and then the text is going to say about us. Perfect, so we've got that left section taken care of. What we'll want to do next is be outside of the nav column, but still be inside this nav columns. We'll want to create another div and call it nav-column. Now within this nav column, similar to the one we did previously, we have a nav-label. And this label is going to say contact. So the left section is regarding our menu links, and then the right section is regarding the contacts. So we'll want to create a div with the class name of nav-infos. And inside infos, similar to what we did with the column and columns, what we want to do is write nav-info. So it could be singular. And this is actually going to be a UL for an unordered list rather than a div. So inside this order list, we'll create a list item with the class name of nav-info-label. So this will be the label specific to our nav info. And this will say email. And then we'll create another list item. And inside this list item, we'll have a nav link. So I'm just going to copy what we have up here actually. Just paste that in. Change the about us to say /contact. And then the text will say get in touch with us. All right, so we want to add another link, and the second link underneath contact is going to take us to the audit page, and the text is going to say get a free audit. So that completes one section of the nav infos, and we've got 4 to do actually. So let's copy and paste another nav info, and what we'll want to add inside this nav info, let's delete this right here. So we have nav info and just the label. We'll change the label to say headquarters, and over here we're just using list tags just to simply write the address of the spot. So it's route to Jura 49, and so I'm just writing the address here. And then in the next line we have 1700. I think it says Fribourg, and then the country, which is Switzerland. We'll copy this UL, we'll copy this nav info again and paste it underneath the previous one we created, and we'll change this label to phone. And all we're gonna have here is just one list item, and this list item is just going to take the phone number. So it's going to be this number right here, 755102870. Now, of course, you can add whatever you want to add here. I'm just trying to recreate the website as much as possible. And finally, the last one is legal, and we will just have privacy and cookies. Now, on the Mailriver site, these are actually clickable, And I believe maybe the phone number might also be clickable, but the privacy and cookies takes you to the privacy page. In our case, we're just not going to recreate that because we're not necessarily learning anything new from recreating the privacy or the cookies page. So we'll just leave it like so. Okay, cool. And finally, we're just exporting default navigation. So let's go ahead and display this in our app. What we can do is go to app.js, and I want to display it behind the entire sort of app itself right here. So this app div. So what I'm going to do is just write navigation right here. And the idea is that the navigation is always hiding behind the app. I don't think I'm importing it. Okay. Yeah, so the idea is that we're always hiding the navigation behind the app div. And then whenever we click on it, the app div slides and reveals the navigation. So make sure we import navigation, which is I'm doing up here. And we're importing it from /components / navigation. What is navigation? What is all these twos? Wow, what is going on? It is at this moment I realized that all my files were duplicated. I stopped the video, delete everything, and then we're back on track, so don't worry about it. I also want to note, if you've enjoyed it so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's jump back into the video. I'm actually not done importing, so let me type in navigation and save this. And if we preview, you can see that if we scroll down, navigation is on the bottom. If we refresh the page, everything should still work, but then the navigation is down here. We don't want it down here, we want to style it next. So let's go ahead and jump into our styles. We can open up the navigation Sass file, go ahead and create it within your components folder, and don't forget to import it within your app Sass. What I'm going to do next is simply open up navigation Sass and the navigation.js and write the skeleton for our Sass file. So we start off with nav. Next we've got container, but we're going to ignore container. We're having to write nav-columns. Next we have the .nav-column with one S, so it's singular. Nested within that we have the nav-label. And one thing we want to highlight here as you're following along, these are very similar layouts. So as we're styling the first one, the second one should have the similar styles. So within the nav-column, we have nav-label, and then a sibling of the nav label is going to be the nav links. So we do .nav-links. And we also want to take a look at the bottom section here. So we have nav column, then we have the nav label, and then we have nav infos. So another sibling to the nav links and nav label is the nav-infos. So we do .nav-infos. First, let's just finish the nav links. We have nav links as the UL, and then we have the li and an a tag for the nav link components. So in the nav links, what we could do in here is write an li, and inside of the li, we'll add an a tag. We'll leave nav label like so because nothing is being nested inside of it. However, in the nav infos, there is a bit of class names that we need to add. So if we scroll down here and find nav infos, we have nav info, which is singular inside the nav infos. And then inside of the nav info, we have a nav info -label. So we could add .nav-info-label. And then finally the sibling to nav-info-label is just a li tag with an a tag in there. So let's save this, and we've got our skeleton completely finished. If you want to pause and then copy this, you can go ahead and do that. What we want to do next is close navigation.js and start styling. What we want to do is set left to 0. We want to set the top to -1 pixels, the width set to 100%. Oops. Okay, and then the height set to 100% as well. We want the Z index to be set to 1. And then we also want to set the display to none. That's because the navigation is initially going to be hidden. And then when we activate the hamburger menu or click on the hamburger menu, it's going to be set to display block. However, we are going to comment this out because we do want to see the styles. And then for position, we're going to set this to fixed. Overflow, set that to hidden. And then for our background, we're going to set the background color to a yellow variable. Now this yellow variable is not yet defined, so you'll want to open up the variable sass and create a yellow variable. We'll set the yellow variable to FFF3D8, which is sort of like a really light yellow color. Go ahead and save this and we can close out of that. Then we're gonna go down to the nav columns. And for the nav columns, we're gonna set this to a width of 45%. And we're going to include a media query in here. So go ahead and write at include media. And the media query we wanna include is if the screen is less than or equal to a phone device. What we want to do is we want to add padding. So we're going to add padding 0 top and bottom and 16 pixels for the left and right. Next, we want to style the nav columns. Now for the nav columns, what we're going to do is we're going to type in transform, translate, Y 125 pixels. Then we're going to set display to flex, and we're going to add padding and set the padding top to 0 and the padding left and right to 32 pixels. We are then going to include a media query. So go ahead and write at include, but make sure you spell it correctly because I didn't. So we're going to include media, and what we want to do here is when our screen has reached a viewport width of less than or equal to 654 pixels, we'll want to set the flex direction to column. And we'll want to add padding for when we've reached a viewport width of the phone device. So go ahead and add a padding of 16 pixels. Next, we're going to jump into the nav column and we're going to set the width to 45%. We're going to include a media query as well. So the media query we're including is when the device is less than or equal to 654 pixels, and we're going to change the width to 100%. While still being in the nav columns, we want to access the last child, so the second nav column, and we want to set that width to 55%. And we're going to include a media query in that, and what we're doing here is also setting this to 100%. So let's check out what we have so far. We can see that the navigation is completely on top, which is fine for now. But we've split up the menu on the left section and the contact on the right section. And we've given this contact section the 55% width, while this menu section has that 45% width. We're not done yet, so let's keep going. Next, we have the nav label. And what we're doing to the nav label is setting the margin bottom to 3 rem. And then setting the font size to 1.2 rem. We're adding a media query in here, so I'm just going to copy this include, and we're changing this to tablet. So when the device has reached a viewport width of smaller or equal to a tablet, we're going to set the font size to 1 rem. And the margin bottom is going to be set to 1.4 rem. Now we're going to copy this tablet media query and paste it again. But we're going to change this to a phone viewport, and we're changing the font size to 0.875 rem and setting the margin bottom to 1.2 rem. We can then move on to the nav links, and the nav links is going to have a padding and a margin of 0. The nav links is that UL tag, and ULs by default come with padding and margin added to them. Next, we've got the li or the list item, and we just want to set the list style to none. We also want to add a margin bottom to these, and the margin bottom is going to be set to 2.8 rem. We're then going to paste in a media query, and what the media query is going to do is just change the margin bottom to 1.6 rem when we've reached a phone device. Next, we're working on the A tag, which is the nav link from React router, and what we're going to do is set the font weight to 600. We're going to set the font size to 2.8 rem. Text decoration, we want to set that to none. And we want to put the color to black. Oops, black. I can't spell. We're going to include a media query here for a phone device where we just simply change the font size. So font size is going to be changed to 2 rem. Font style. Font size 2 rem. All right, let's scroll this down. Let's save this and take a look at what we've got. So the font size doesn't seem to be working here. That's because I put style, so I put size. Now we can see that the About Us services approach, they're working pretty well. This is going to be layered on top just because it has a higher Z index, but it's fine. Don't worry about it. We're going to continue on, and we're going to work on the nav infos next. Go ahead and set the display to flex. We're going to do flex-wrap, and we want this to wrap. We're also going to add a media query in here, and this media query is going to wait until we've hit 654 pixels, and it's just going to justify the content to space between. Now on to the nav info, and we're going to set the padding for the nav info to a padding of 0, and we're also going to give it a width of 50%. What we also want to do is we want to target the children of the nav info. So what we want is we want to target the second child. So we'll do nth child 2, and we want to do nth child 3. What we want to happen here is when we reach this breakpoint of 654 pixels, we want to hide these two infos. So I'll go ahead and set the display to none. That's because when you reach a mobile viewport, the mobile viewport, you don't necessarily have too much space to work with, and you need to limit what isn't necessarily all that important. Next, in our nav info label, we're just going to set the font weight to 600 and then work on our list item. The font weight is going to be set to 300, and then the list style is going to be set to none, while the font size is, I keep putting font style, FOS, yes. While the font size is set to 1.4 rem, and our margin bottom is going to be set to 1.2 rem. We're also going to add a media query, so go ahead and copy and paste this, except change the value to a tablet. What we're changing once we reach the tablet viewport is the font size and the margin bottom. I realized that I did not put rem in the font size for the list item, so make sure you add that. And we could do the same for the tablet. But once we hit the tablet viewport, we're switching it to 1.2 rem. And the margin bottom is going to be switched to 1 rem. And then you can copy and paste this again and switch the device to a phone. And what you want to do is switch the font size to 1 rem and the margin bottom to 0.875 rem. Go ahead and save this, and then let's scroll down a bit. Then we're finally just going to work on our A tag, setting the text decoration to none, and then setting the color to the black variable. Let's save this and take a look at what we have so far. So we can see that the menu is laid out perfectly, and honestly, it looks good to me. So the only thing missing is when we hover on the A tags for all of them, we want this sort of line to swipe underneath from left to right. So let's do that. We can scroll all the way back to the top and nest it inside the nav tag. What we could do is we could simply add an A tag. And so this is going to go global across all the A tags in the navigation. So we're going to set an A tag to position relative, and then we're going to add an after pseudo element. The content's going to be set to quotations. Position is going to be set to absolute. Let me add semicolon. So position absolute. The width is going to be 0, and the height is going to be 2 pixels. We're then going to put display block, and we're going to give it a margin top of 5 pixels. Next, we're adding a right set to 0 and a background of the variable black. Next, we can add a transition, and we're just going to set the transition to 0.4 seconds with an ease. What we want to do next is outside the after pseudo element, we want to add an ampersand hover. And so when we hover on the A tag, what we want to happen is we want to target the pseudo element again, and simply just set the width to 100%, the left to 0, and we could set the background color to black. Let's save this and preview what we have. So when I hover on About Us, you can see the line goes from left to right. And it should work with any A tag that we have. Let's see if we can find other ones. It didn't seem to work for these right here. Oh, there it goes. It's working. I think that this is just covering over the other ones. So when it comes time to animate or set it behind, it should work, and there's no need to worry about that right now. Now, what I would also like to do is set some global styles in our app Sass, specifically ones targeting the app class. So what we could do in our app Sass is do app and then set the Z index to 2, which will be over the menu. Then set the transform translate y to 0. And we'll want to make this a position relative. Now outside of the app, what I would like to do is target the page class name, set the height to 100 viewport height, and we'll set the width to 100%. Now the background color of this is going to be a variable white. And inside of this, there's going to be a row with the display of flex and an align items of center. So this is kind of going to specifically target the other pages that we haven't designed yet. Now let's go back to our app, and what should happen is our hamburger menu or navigation should disappear. It's not completely gone, however, it's just laid behind this homepage app. So if we look at our console, we've got app right here, but if we close this, you can see that nav is being rendered underneath. And to prove it once more, if we select app and set the display to none, you could see that the navigation is right behind it, working just like we want it to. Now I'm going to refresh this page so that we can have it go back to normal, and we can then carry on with our app. Now one thing I would like to highlight is if we inspect our website, what should happen when we change viewports is that it kind of remains funky. And the reason for this is when we grab the inner height of our app, we're grabbing it to whatever the viewport or the website loaded on. So if I switch the viewport, it's going to be wonky like this unless I refresh the page. Now, this isn't a huge deal because a lot of times when people visit websites, they aren't necessarily checking it out and seeing if it's responsive or not on the browser. It's usually just loaded on the phone if you're using the phone. No one's really checking that. Now, if you are building a website, you don't necessarily want this to happen. So you saw that we are loading it on a phone device. We're capturing the height and then setting that viewport height variable. And so when we switch the screen, this is not being responsive at all, simply because the JavaScript is not updating the viewport height. Now, to fix that is what we're going to do next. Let me close this and refresh the page, and let's jump into our app.js. Now, what we're going to do in our app.js is simply define a dimension state. So we'll create state and just call it dimensions. And we'll say set dimensions for setting the dimension state. We'll go ahead and bring in useState. And inside of useState, we're going to set a height, and we'll set this to window.innerHeight. And then we have a width. And for the width, we'll set it to window.innerWidth. So this is capturing the width and the height and setting them to the height and width properties. useState's throwing an error, so make sure we import that. All right, so we've got that imported. Now what I want to do next is I want to set the state for whenever our app runs in our use effect. To do that, let's bring this down a bit here. Now what I want to do is create a function that sets the state to the height and the width. So what I can do is write const handle resize. And handle resize will simply just set the dimensions to the inner height and inner width. So we'll simply write this right here. Now this is a bit redundant because we're already defining it, but what we want to do is we just want to update every single time we change the viewport's height or width. And what we could do right here is write window.add event listener, and then we can write resize. And just simply for the second argument, pass in this handle resize function. I'm gonna move this prevent flashing from happening all the way to the top, so we can just leave it up here. And what I want to do is return a cleanup function. And what this is going to do is simply just remove the event listener from the window. So I can say window.remove event listener resize handle resize. Now what I'll want to do to see if this is working is I'll go ahead and grab dimensions, and in here let us just write dimensions. Now let's preview our app, and it's not working because we need to write dimensions.width. Now let's preview our app, and now it's going to give us this loading screen, of course. But it's nowhere to be displayed. That's fine. We could just log it, honestly. So let's just console .log dimensions. Now, if we take a look at the console, what should happen is it should just return an object of the dimensions. So you can see it already returned a bunch. Let me refresh just to see that. Okay, so it's returning height and the width. So the height that I have right now is 1083 with the width of 1297. And if I move this at all in terms of the width, it's going to update the state every single time I move it. Height also works. So if we shrink it vertically, you can see that it's working. Now, this is awesome and it's good, and we want this to happen because we don't want to have that unresponsive look, if I should say. But at this point right now, it's a bit troublesome because the state's updating every single time I move it. Now, this won't happen if you're going to production and people are resizing, because no one really does that. But just to be on the safe side, what we want to happen is we want to sort of add a debounce or a delay that will only execute the function after a second. So it would update the state's dimensions after you resize a second later. This will prevent a bunch of re-rendering, which we don't want, and ultimately this is just going to slow down our app. So this is definitely optional, but I do recommend it. So let's make this not necessarily re-render every second, but just allow us a second to switch the viewport width and then run the functions. So let's go ahead and figure out how to do that. We can jump back into our app, and what I'll want to do is create a function for allowing us to have that delay. And just to be completely transparent here, I did find this through a Pluralsight article, so that was definitely helpful for me. What we're going to do is we're going to pass an FN and MS. The MS is going to represent the milliseconds, and we'll want to create a timer in here. So we'll just say let timer, and we're going to return an anonymous function, which first will clear timeout for the timer. And then we're going to define what timer is going to do. So timer is going to set timeout, and we'll write an anonymous function in here. We'll set timer to null. And then we will do fn.apply, and we'll pass in this and arguments. Now what we want to do is we want to wrap debounce around the handle resize function. So to do this, I'll just create a new function, and I'll call this debounced handle resize. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to call the debounce function that we define up top, and simply just create a function, and we'll call this function handle resize. And what this function is going to do is what our function over here did. So we're just going to take set dimensions to the height and the width and just clear out handle resize that we did earlier. We'll want to update the handle resize function on the event listener. So go ahead and do that and make sure you're passing in the debounced handle resize. We'll want to preview what we're doing. So right now, right when the website loaded, it is setting the state for what our viewport height and the viewport width is at. What we can do is if we shrink this, the state is still updating. So I think we need to actually refresh. Okay, we don't. So there's a mistake here. And the mistake that I see is that we never defined what MS is going to be. The way to define what MS is going to be is at the very bottom, we could put 1,000 milliseconds. Oops, did I put it right? Yeah. Right here, we could put a comma at the end of the debounced handle resize. We could put a comma and 1,000 milliseconds. This will represent the milliseconds in our set timeout. So now if we preview, what should happen is it should wait 1 second after the viewports change and then execute that function. So you can see that it already loaded the height and the width. And now if I shrink it down and I stop, then it will load height and width again. Now if I make it a lot bigger, it would always wait that 1,000 milliseconds before executing the function to bring out the viewport. Now this might look a little janky, but trust me, in terms of re-rendering, it's a lot better. If I open up the mobile viewport, it will wait a second and then it will snap into place. If I take off the mobile viewport, it'll wait a second and then snap into place. That's exactly what we want for this project, especially because we keep going back and forth with the different viewports and we want to make sure everything looks perfect. Cool, so that is awesome and that looks good to me. What we could do is just close that and then continue on with the code. Now, another thing that I want to do is I want to update this variable for the VH that's across all of our SAS files. I want to update this to where it's accessing the dimensions height. So what we could do is write dimensions.height right here, and this will access the state's height rather than window.innerHeight. Okay, so even right now with the animations running, if I just switch it to a mobile, it would just update and everything is fine. So you might be asking, why is this important? Besides the fact that I had already shown you with switching between the viewports, this is also very important because when you're working with responsive animations and you want responsiveness in your JavaScript, you could simply just write a ternary operator checking if the state's width is greater than 768 pixels, which is a tablet, or less than, and then you want to execute a certain command. As we start animating here in the next part, what we're going to see is that when we reach a mobile device, we'll want to change the animation's behavior dependent on the screen size. Let's go ahead and start working on animations now.